The monitor's flatline wasn't just a sound, it was a death warrant for everyone in the room. 12 of the world's most elite surgeons stood frozen in the penthouse of the Moretti estate, their $5,000 an hour hands trembling. Dominic Moretti, the Iron King of the Midwest, was dying, and his heart had just given up. Outside, 300 soldiers waited for a signal. If the boss died, the city burned. But as the lead surgeon reached for the time of death, a soft voice from the shadows stopped him cold. Tess Miller, the girl who scrubbed the floors, saw the one thing the geniuses missed, and what she saw wasn't a medical failure, it was a murder. The air in the master suite of the Moretti penthouse was thick with the smell of antiseptic and impending doom. Dominic Moretti, a man whose name was whispered with a mix of reverence and terror from the shipping docks to the governor's office, lay motionless on a custom-built medical bed. His skin, usually a tanned olive, was now the color of wet parchment. Standing around him were 12 men and women, the 12 apostles of medicine, flown in on private jets from Zurich, Johns Hopkins, and Tokyo. Among them was Dr. Alistair Sterling, a Nobel Prize nominee in neurocardiology, and Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the woman who had once restarted the heart of a fallen European monarch. "The tox screen is negative for all known biological agents," Dr. Sterling whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. "The heart is structurally sound, yet it's seizing. It's as if his own nervous system is telling his heart to stop beating." "We've tried the atropine, the temporary pacer, the internal massage," Dr. Jenkins countered, her voice cracking. "Nothing is holding. He's slipping away." Behind them, leaning against the mahogany double doors, stood Dante Moretti, Dominic's younger, more volatile brother. Dante wasn't a man of science. He was a man of lead and gunpowder. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than a suburban home. "You have 10 minutes, Dante said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "My brother spent $40 million on this medical wing. He spent $10 million on your retainers. If he doesn't wake up, none of you are leaving this building. Not through the doors, anyway." The doctors exchanged terrified glances. They knew it wasn't an empty threat. The Moretti family didn't sue for malpractice. They settled scores in the concrete foundations of new skyscrapers. In the corner of the room, almost invisible against the heavy velvet drapes, was Tess Miller. She was 23, wore a faded grey uniform, and held a basin of warm water and a silk cloth. Her job was simple: keep the boss's brow clean and stay out of the way. To the doctors, she was part of the furniture. To the Moretti family, she was a ghost. But Tess wasn't just a maid. She was the daughter of Arthur Miller, a man who had been the Moretti family's personal apothecary and fixer for 30 years before he disappeared 3 years ago. She had grown up in a house filled with the smell of crushed herbs, chemical reagents, and old leather-bound books on toxicology. Tess watched as Dr. Sterling prepared a final, desperate injection of adrenaline directly into Dominic's heart. She watched the way Dominic's fingers twitched, not a seizure, but a rhythmic, localized contraction. "It's not the heart," she thought, her pulse hammering in her ears. "It's the peripheral nerves. They're being overstimulated." She looked at the bedside table. There was a glass of water, a silver tray, and a small, innocuous bottle of specialty mineral water that Dominic drank every morning. Then she looked at the bouquet of lilies on the mantelpiece, freshly delivered that morning. "Wait!" Tess's voice rang out, small but piercing. The 12 doctors turned as one. Dante Moretti's eyes, cold as Lake Michigan in January, snapped to her. "Who let the help speak?" Dr. Sterling snapped. "Get out, girl. We are trying to save a life." "You're going to kill him," Tess said, stepping forward, her hands shaking, but her gaze fixed on Dominic. "If you give him that adrenaline, his heart won't just restart. It will explode. You're treating a cardiac arrest, but this is aconite saturation triggered by a catalyst." "Aconite?" Dr. Jenkins scoffed. The tox screen was clear. "Because it's not pure aconitine." Tess stepped closer to the bed. ignoring the guards who moved toward her. "It's a synthetic derivative mixed with a vasodilator. Look at his fingernails. They aren't blue from lack of oxygen. They're deep purple. And look at the lilies." Dante walked over to the flowers. "What about them?" "They're sprayed with a dormant enzyme," Tess explained, her voice gaining strength. "On their own, the flowers are harmless, but the mineral water he drinks contains the base agent. When he breathes in the scent of those lilies, the enzyme activates the poison already in his bloodstream. Adrenaline acts as a turbocharger for that specific toxin. You give him that shot, and you're the ones who pull the trigger." Dr. Sterling laughed nervously. "This is absurd. She's a maid. She probably watches too many soap operas." "Check the pupils again," Tess challenged. "Not for dilation, but for pinwheeling, the rhythmic contraction of the iris." Dr. Jenkins grabbed a penlight and leaned over Dominic. She gasped. "She's right. The irises. They're pulsating. Sterling, put the needle down." Dante Moretti moved like a predator. In 2 strides, he was in Tess's space, his hand gripping her chin, forcing her to look up at him. "How do you know this, Tess? And why shouldn't I think you're part of the hit?" "My father was Arthur Miller," she whispered. "He taught me that the most expensive doctors usually miss the simplest poisons, because they expect the assassin to be as sophisticated as they are. But a real killer? They use the air you breathe." Dante looked at his brother, then back at the girl. "Can you save him?" "I need the kitchen," Tess said, "and I need 5 minutes. If I'm wrong, you can kill me first." "Dante, this is madness!" Sterling cried. "We need to intubate." Dante pulled a gold-plated Desert Eagle from his waistband and pointed it at the doctor's forehead. "The maid is in charge now. Anyone who moves without her say-so gets a new porthole in their skull." Tess didn't wait. She bolted for the door, her mind racing. She didn't just need to save Dominic Moretti's life. She had just realized who had sent those flowers, and they were currently standing in this very building. The kitchen of the Moretti penthouse was a stainless steel cathedral, usually inhabited by Michelin-starred chefs. Now it was a battleground. Tess Miller didn't look like a savior as she ripped open the industrial-sized refrigerator. She looked like a woman possessed. Behind her, 2 of Dominic's cleaners, men with cold eyes and suppressed submachine guns, stood watch. They didn't understand why a maid was grabbing a carton of heavy cream, a bag of charcoal briquettes from the terrace grill, and a bottle of high-end vodka. "I need a mortar and pestle," Tess shouted, her voice echoing off the marble backsplash. "Use a blender," one of the guards grunted. "No, the heat from the blades will denature the carbon," Tess snapped, her hands fling. She found a heavy granite mortar. She began smashing the charcoal into a fine, black dust. Aconite derivative binds to lipids and carbon. The cream provides the fat. The charcoal provides the porous surface to trap the toxin before it hits his lower intestine again. She worked with a frantic precision. Her father, Arthur Miller, had always said that chemistry was just cooking with higher stakes. She remembered him teaching her about the queen of poisons, aconite. It was subtle. It mimicked a heart attack. But the synthetic version she suspected was a masterpiece of cruelty. It cycled through the body, reabsorbing in the gut, creating a loop of agony that no standard detox could break. As she mixed the black slurry, a shadow fell over the doorway. It was Lorenzo, the ghost Veli, Dominic's consigliere and oldest friend. He was a man of 60, elegant in a charcoal suit, his face a roadmap of scars and wisdom. "You're Arthur's girl," Lorenzo said, his voice like gravel. "I haven't seen you since the funeral. The one where there was no body." Tess didn't look up. "My father isn't dead, Lorenzo. He's just gone. And if I don't finish this, Dominic will be gone too." "Dante is losing his mind upstairs," Lorenzo warned. "He's already looking for someone to blame. If this remedy of yours fails, he'll start with you, and then he'll move to the florist, the water delivery man, and eventually the city will bleed." "Then help me," Tess said, thrusting the bowl of black sludge at him. "I need the pure saline from the medical wing and a gastric tube. The doctors won't give it to me. They think I'm a joke." Lorenzo took the bowl. For a second, his eyes softened. "Your father was the only man Dominic truly trusted. Maybe that's why you're the only one who can see the truth." They raced back to the penthouse suite. The scene was chaotic. Dominic's monitor was a chaotic, jagged line of V-fib. The heart was fluttering like a trapped bird. Dr. Sterling was shouting at Dante, his face purple. "This is malpractice! We should be using the defibrillator," Sterling yelled. "One shock will cook his nervous system while that toxin is active," Tess shouted, bursting into the room. "Move!" She didn't wait for permission. She shoved the Nobel-nominated doctor, Sterling, aside. With Lorenzo's help, she threaded the tube down Dominic's throat. It was a brutal, unrefined procedure. Dominic's body convulsed, a reflex even in his near-comatose state. "Hold him down," Tess commanded. Dante and Lorenzo gripped Dominic's shoulders. Tess began pouring the charcoal and cream mixture down the tube. "What is that?" Dr. Jenkins whispered, horrified. "You're giving him soot?" "Activated carbon and a lipid binder," Tess muttered, her eyes fixed on the heart monitor. "Come on, Dominic, fight it." For 30 agonizing seconds, the flat line returned. The long, high-pitched tone filled the room like a scream. Dante pulled his gun and pressed the cold muzzle against Tess's temple. "You killed him!" he hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You little—" Beep! The monitor jumped. Beep! Beep! The jagged line smoothed out into a slow, rhythmic mountain range. Dominic's chest rose in a deep, shuddering breath. The purple hue in his fingernails began to recede, replaced by a faint, ghostly pink. The room went silent. The 12 doctors stared at the screen, then at the maid, as if she had just walked on water. "His heart rate is stabilizing," Dr. Jenkins whispered, checking his pulse. "The arrhythmia is... it's gone." Dante slowly lowered his gun, his breath escaping in a long, shaky exhale. He looked at Tess, his eyes unreadable, a mix of fury, shock, and a newfound, dangerous curiosity. "He's not out of the woods," Tess said, wiping her forehead with her sleeve, leaving a streak of charcoal across her skin. "The toxin is neutralized in his stomach, but the damage to his vascular system is there. He needs a specific vasodilator. Not the synthetic stuff you have in the kits. He needs hawthorn tincture and magnesium chloride in a 4-to-1 ratio." "We don't have that here," Sterling said, trying to regain his dignity. "That's folk medicine." "It's what saved my father's life when the Russians tried to poison him in '98, Lorenzo intervened. He turned to his men. "Find it, now!" As the doctors moved to stabilize Dominic under Tess's directions, she stepped back into the shadows. Her heart was still racing. She looked at the lilies on the mantelpiece again. Something was wrong. She walked over to the flowers. They were white calla lilies, elegant and funereal. She leaned in, not to smell them, but to look at the card tucked into the plastic holder, with deepest sympathy for the loss of a legend, the family. The Moretti family was the only family that mattered in Chicago. This wasn't a gift, it was a taunt. Tess pulled the card out. On the back, in tiny, elegant script, were the letters A.M. Her blood turned to ice. Arthur Miller, her father. No, her father would never kill Dominic. He loved him like a brother. Unless he was being forced, or unless someone was using his signature style to frame him. "Tess," she jumped. Dante was standing right behind her. He didn't look like the monster who had just threatened to blow her brains out. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Where did you really learn that?" Dante asked, his voice low. "My brother's doctors are the best in the world, and they were ready to sign his death certificate. How does a maid know more than a Nobel Prize winner?" "I told you," Tess said, slipping the card into her pocket. "My father." "Arthur disappeared 3 years ago," Dante said, stepping closer. "He was suspected of stealing 20 million from the Moretti accounts before he vanished. Dominic never believed it. He refused to put a hit out on him. He said Arthur was neutral. But if your father is the one who poisoned my brother— He didn't, Tess snapped. My father would never use aconite. He hated it. He called it the coward's tool. Whoever did this is trying to make it look like his work. Dante's eyes narrowed. He reached out, his thumb brushing the charcoal smudge on her cheek. The gesture was surprisingly gentle, yet felt like a threat. I want to believe you, because if you're lying, I won't just kill you. I'll make sure you stay alive long enough to watch everything you love burn. Suddenly the doors to the penthouse burst open. Victor Moretti, the eldest brother and the legitimate face of the family's real estate empire, walked in. He was followed by a phalanx of lawyers and his own personal security. I heard the news, Victor said, his eyes scanning the room, landing briefly on the bed where Dominic lay breathing. Is he? He's alive, Dante said, his voice turning cold. Thanks to the maid. Victor's gaze swung to Tess. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was a look of pure, unadulterated venom. For a split second, Tess saw it, the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his hands clenched. Victor hadn't come to mourn his brother. He had come to claim the throne, and Tess Miller had just ruined his coronation. A maid? Victor sneered, recovering his composure. Dante, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. She's probably the one who did it. A classic hero complex. Poison the master so you can save him and earn a reward. She saved him from the doctors you hired, Victor, Dante countered. Regardless, Victor said, stepping toward the bed. The family council is meeting in 2 hours. With Dominic incapacitated, we need to decide on a successor. The commission won't wait for him to wake up. He is awake, a rasping voice came from the bed. The room went dead silent. Dominic Moretti's eyes were open. They were bloodshot and tired, but they held the weight of a man who had looked into the abyss and spat in its face. He looked directly at Victor, then at Dante, and finally, his gaze settled on Tess. Tess, he whispered, his voice like dry leaves. You have your father's eyes. He tried to sit up, but groaned, falling back. Don't move, Tess said, rushing to his side. The toxin is out, but your heart is weak. You need rest. Dominic grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. He leaned in, his voice barely audible to anyone but her. The lilies, he wheezed. Check the soil. Before Tess could respond, Dominic's eyes rolled back, and he fell into a deep, medicated sleep. Victor moved forward to intervene, but Dante stepped in his path. You heard the lady, brother. He needs rest. Everyone out. Now! As the room cleared, Tess found herself alone for a moment. She looked at the vase of lilies. She reached into the rich, black soil and dug her fingers in. Her nails hit something hard. She pulled it out. It was a small, waterproof digital drive. Wrapped around it was a lock of hair, grey, coarse and unmistakable. It was her father's hair. Tess realized then that the hospital room was no longer the safest place in the building. It was the most dangerous, because the person who tried to kill Dominic Moretti wasn't just a rival. It was someone who had her father, and they were using him as a puppet to destroy the Moretti empire from the inside out. And now, she was the only one who knew. The digital drive felt like a shard of ice against Tess's palm. She slid it into the hidden pocket of her apron, just as the heavy oak doors swung open again. It was Lorenzo, his expression unreadable. The doctors are setting up a perimeter in the hallway, Lorenzo said, his eyes scanning the room, lingering for a heartbeat on the disturbed soil of the lily vase. Dante is arguing with the family council in the library. Victor is being Victor. He's calling for a vote of no confidence in Dominic's health by sunrise. Tess wiped her dirt-stained hands on her apron. He's trying to steal the chair while his brother is still breathing. In this world, breathing isn't enough. You have to be able to bite, Lorenzo replied. He stepped closer, dropping his voice. "What did you find in the dirt, Tess? I saw your shoulders tense." Tess hesitated. Lorenzo had been her father's friend, but in the Moretti hierarchy, loyalty was a shifting sand dune. "Nothing. Just checking the routes. I think the flowers were the delivery system for the enzyme." Lorenzo stared at her for a long beat, his dark eyes searching hers. "Arthur was a better liar than you, but he always kept his best secrets under his fingernails. Be careful, child. This penthouse is full of microphones, and not all of them belong to the FBI." He turned and left, leaving Tess in a suffocating silence. She knew she couldn't stay in the room. If Victor's men searched her, she was dead. She needed a computer, one that wasn't monitored by the Moretti IT department. She slipped out the back service entrance, moving through the labyrinthine corridors used by the staff. She made her way to the basement, the engine room, where the industrial laundry and backup generators hummed. In a small, cramped office sat Leo, a skinny kid with thick glasses who handled the inventory software. He was the only person in the building who didn't look at Tess like she was a ghost. He looked at her like she was a girl. "Tess, what are you doing down here? The whole building is on lockdown. I heard the boss almost kicked it. Leo, I need a favor, a big one." She pulled out the drive. "I need to see what's on this, offline. No network, no cloud. If this touches the internal server, we both disappear." Leo's Adam's apple bobbed. He knew the stakes. But he also remembered the time Tess had brought him real chicken soup when he was shivering with the flu in the staff quarters. He took the drive and plugged it into an old, air-gapped Panasonic Toughbook. The screen flickered. A single folder appeared, titled The Apothecary's Ledger. Leo clicked it. It wasn't a list of poisons. It was a series of video files, time-stamped over the last 3 years. Tess's breath hitched. The first video opened. It was her father, Arthur Miller. He looked older, his hair completely white, sitting in a dimly lit room that looked like a basement laboratory. He wasn't tied up. He was working. "If you're watching this, Dominic is either dead or dying." Arthur's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking as he measured a clear liquid. "And if you're watching this, Tess, I am so sorry. I didn't leave because of the money. I left because I found the cancer in the Moretti family tree. Not a biological one. A traitor." Tess felt a tear prick her eye. "Dad," she whispered. "Dominic is being poisoned by degrees," Arthur continued. "Small doses of thallium in his scotch, followed by a catalyst. I tried to neutralize it in secret, but they found me. Not the rivals, not the outfit. It was one of his own. Someone who wants to merge the Moretti assets with the West Side Syndicate. They're using me to craft the perfect death, one that looks like natural heart failure." Suddenly a door opened in the background of the video. A man walked in. His face was obscured by shadow, but Tess recognized the gait, the slight limp in the right leg, the way he adjusted his cufflinks. Victor Moretti. "Time's up, Arthur." Victor's voice came through the speakers, cold and sharp. "Is the aconite derivative ready? The lilies are being delivered tomorrow." The video cut to black. Tess felt the world tilt. Her father wasn't just a prisoner. He was the one being forced to manufacture the weapon that was killing his best friend. "Tess, we have to go to Dante," Leo whispered, his face pale. "He'll kill Victor for this." "No," Tess said, grabbing the drive. "Dante is a sledgehammer. If he goes after Victor now, the family council will see it as a power grab. Victor has the lawyers and the council in his pocket. He'll claim the video is a deep fake created by me to protect my traitor father. I need more than a video. I need the antidote's source code and my father's location." "The second file," Leo pointed. "It's a GPS log." Before he could click it, the heavy metal door of the office was kicked off its hinges. 2 of Victor's personal security team, led by a man named Kane, a mercenary who enjoyed his job too much, stepped in. Kane held a silenced Glock. "Victor doesn't like people looking at his private movies," Kane said, tilting his head. "Hand it over, Tess. And the kid? He's surplus to requirements." "Run, Leo!" Tess screamed, throwing the heavy granite mortar she'd brought from the kitchen at the nearest light fixture. The room plunged into darkness. The only light came from the glowing screen of the tough book. Tess lunged for the laptop, but Kane was faster. He grabbed her by the hair, slamming her face into the desk. "You're afeard of the dark, sweetheart," Kane hissed. "Don't worry. Where you're going, it's always dark." "Wait!" Tess gasped. Her cheek pressed against the cold metal. "You kill me. You'll never find the final component. The aconite in Dominic's system. I didn't just neutralize it. I locked it. In 4 hours, his blood will start to crystallize. Only my father knows the sequence to stop it, and he's not talking, is he?" It was a total lie, a desperate gamble based on her father's old stories of the chemist's ransom. Kane hesitated. He looked at his radio. "Boss, the girl says she put a lock on the poison." "What's the play?" The radio crackled. Victor's voice came through, sounding bored. "Bring her to the North Warehouse. If she's lying, we'll let her father watch what happens when you use lye on human skin. And kill the boy." "No!" Tess screamed. A gunshot, muffled by a silencer, rang out. Leo collapsed, a bloom of red spreading across his white tech shirt. "Leo!" Kane dragged Tess towards the exit. She looked back at Leo's still body, her heart shattering. She had spent her life trying to be invisible, to be the poor maid who saw nothing. But the ghost in the machine was out now. As she was shoved into the back of a black SUV in the underground garage, she saw a flicker of movement by the concrete pillars. A pair of eyes, cold, blue, and familiar. Dante. He didn't move. He didn't draw his gun. He just watched as the SUV sped away. Tess felt a cold realization wash over her. Dante wasn't there to save her. He was following her. He was letting her be the bait to find where Victor was hiding the Iron King's crown and her father. The North Warehouse was a relic of Chicago's industrial past, a hulking skeleton of rusted iron and cracked concrete sitting on the edge of the freezing river. Inside, the air tasted of salt, diesel, and old blood. Tess was shoved into a chair in the center of a wide, open floor, illuminated by a single, flickering halogen lamp. Her hands were zip-tied behind her, the plastic cutting into her wrists. Across from her, sitting on a crate of imported olive oil, was Victor Moretti. He was fastidiously cleaning his glasses with a silk pocket square, looking more like a tax accountant than a man who had just ordered a boy's execution. "You have a very annoying habit of surviving, Tess," Victor said, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. "First the slum where you grew up, then the cleaning crew, and now a chemical assassination. My brother always had a soft spot for your father. It was a weakness. Loyalty to the dead is just a weight that pulls you underwater." Tess spat a mouthful of blood onto the concrete. "My father is worth 10 of you, Victor. He didn't just build this empire. He kept it healthy. You're just the maggot eating the corpse." "None." Victor's expression didn't change, but he stood up and walked toward a heavy steel door at the back of the room. He slid the viewing port open. "Arthur, come and see what your brilliance has brought you." The door creaked open. Arthur Miller stumbled out, shoved by Kane. He looked skeletal, his white hair matted with sweat. When his eyes landed on Tess, his knees buckled. "Tess, no, Victor, you promised. You said if I finished the compound, she wouldn't be touched." "I lied, Arthur," Victor said simply. "Plans change when Maid start playing doctor. Now Tess says she locked the toxin in Dominic's blood. She says only you know the sequence to stop his blood from crystallizing. Is that true? Or is she just as good a liar as you?" Arthur looked at Tess. In that one look, a decade of shared secrets passed between them. He saw the bruise on her cheek, the fire in her eyes, and the way she was subtly rubbing her zip ties against a sharp edge of the chair's metal frame. "She's telling the truth," Arthur croaked, his voice cracking. "I built a fail-safe, a dead man's switch in the chemistry. If the catalyst isn't neutralized by a specific saline-base counteragent within 6 hours, The aconite bonds with the calcium in the blood. It turns the circulatory system into glass. Victor leaned in, his face inches from Arthur's. "Then give me the formula, now." "I need my notes," Arthur said, "and I need the girl to help me. My hands, they shake too much. She's the only one who knows the ratios." Victor signaled to Kane. The mercenary stepped forward, pulling a jagged hunting knife from his belt. He didn't go for Arthur. He grabbed Tess's hand and pressed the blade against her pinky finger. 5 minutes, Victor said, checking his watch. "Every 60 seconds. I don't have that formula. Tess loses a digit. I don't need her hands to make the antidote, Arthur. I just need your brain." "Wait!" Tess screamed. "The formula is in the ledger. The drive you took from the basement." "The drive is encrypted," Victor sneered. "Our best hackers can't crack the BIOS lock." "Because it's not a digital lock," Tess yelled, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It's a thermal chromic trigger. You have to cool the drive to exactly 4 degrees Celsius while it's plugged in. The hardware is rigged to melt if it stays at room temperature too long." Victor looked at Kane. "Is that possible?" "The girl's father is a freak for that kind of James Bond crap," Kane grumbled. "It's possible." "Get a bowl of ice," Victor commanded. As Kane moved away, Victor turned his back to consult with another guard. It was the opening Tess needed. She looked at her father. Arthur was leaning against a pillar, his eyes darting to a heavy electrical box on the wall behind Victor. The override, Tess thought. She felt the zip tie give way. The sharp metal edge of the chair had finally frayed the plastic, but she kept her hands behind her back. "Dad," she mouthed silently. Arthur nodded almost imperceptibly. He reached into his tattered lab coat and pulled out a small glass vial he had managed to palm before being dragged out. It wasn't an antidote. It was phosphorus white, suspended in oil. "Here is your formula, Victor," Arthur shouted, throwing the vial at the halogen lamp above their heads. The glass shattered against the hot bulb. In an instant, the phosphorus ignited, creating a blinding, white-hot flash and a cloud of thick, choking smoke. "Kill them!" Victor yelled, shielding his eyes. Bang! 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 Gunshots shattered the windows of the warehouse, but they didn't come from Victor's men. The heavy rolling doors of the warehouse were smashed open by a black, armored SUV. Dante Moretti stepped out of the driver's side, a submachine gun in each hand, looking like the angel of death in a tailored suit. "Victor!" Dante's voice roared over the chaos. "You forgot the first rule of the family. You never ever touch the help." The warehouse erupted into a war zone. Victor's men scrambled for cover behind crates, returning fire. Tess lunged for her father, tackling him to the ground as bullets whizzed overhead, sparking off the concrete. "We have to get to the SUV," Tess shouted over the din. "The drive," Arthur gasped, pointing to the table where Victor had left the digital ledger. "Tess, that drive has the evidence of the West Side merger. It's the only thing that can stop the commission from handing the city to Victor." Tess looked at the table. It was 30 feet away, right in the line of fire between Dante and Victor's mercenaries. "Stay down," she commanded her father. She didn't run. She crawled, staying low to the ground, moving through the shadows of the machinery. She saw Kane aiming his rifle at Dante's head. Without thinking, Tess grabbed a heavy lead pipe from the floor and swung with every ounce of her strength. Crack! The pipe connected with Kane's knee. He screamed, his shot going wide. Tess didn't stop. She dove for the table, grabbed the drive, and rolled behind a stack of steel drums. "Dante, left side, behind the forklift!" she screamed. Dante spun, his gun spitting fire, taking out the 2 shooters Tess had spotted. He looked at her, a grim, bloody smile touching his lips. "Not bad for a maid, Miller." But the victory was short-lived. A sudden, booming explosion rocked the back of the warehouse. Victor had triggered the secondary charges. He was going to level the building with everyone inside. "The docks!" Arthur yelled. "The emergency exit to the river!" Dante grabbed Tess by the arm, hauling her towards the SUV. "Get in, now! My father!" Dante looked back. Arthur was standing by the electrical main, his hand on the lever. "I have to vent the gas," Arthur shouted, his face illuminated by the growing orange glow of the fire. "If the tanks blow, the whole block goes up. Go, Tess. Save Dominic. Use the drive. Dad, no. Go." Dante shoved Tess into the back of the SUV and slammed the door. He floored the accelerator, the tires screeching as they burst through the back wall, just as the north warehouse vanished in a pillar of fire. Tess screamed, her face pressed against the glass. The last thing she saw was her father's silhouette, standing tall amidst the flames, a guardian of a secret that was now hers alone to carry. As the SUV sped toward the city skyline, Dante glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with a dark, burning respect. "He saved us," Dante said quietly. "Now, we save the king. And then, we hunt Victor." Tess gripped the digital drive until the edges drew blood from her palm. "No," she whispered, her voice hardening into something sharp and lethal. "We don't just hunt him, we erase him." The return to the Moretti penthouse was not a homecoming. It was an invasion. Dante didn't use the front elevators. He led Tess through the service entrance, his hand never leaving his sidearm. The air in the building was different now, charged with the static of a coming storm. The 12 apostles of medicine had been reduced to 3, the others having fled when the first shots were fired at the warehouse. "He's crashing again," Dr. Jenkins gasped as they burst into the master suite. The monitors were screaming. Dominic's heart rate was a frantic, irregular rhythm. "Whatever you did before, it's wearing off. His blood pressure is bottoming out." Tess didn't hesitate. She threw the digital drive at Dr. Sterling, who was cowering near the window. "Plug that into the bypass monitor. Now. It contains the molecular sequence for the synthetic aconitine. I don't take orders from—" Dante's gun was at Sterling's ear before he could finish. "Do it, or I'll use your degrees as bandages for the hole I'm about to put in you." As Sterling's trembling hands worked the computer, Tess moved to the bedside. Dominic looked like a ghost. His skin was translucent, the veins in his neck bulging and dark. She reached for the medical kit, grabbing a vial of pure magnesium and a syringe. "The drive is open," Sterling shouted. "There's a file. The Lazarus Protocol. It's a chemical map." Tess scanned the screen. Her father's brilliance was laid bare in a series of complex equations. He hadn't just made a poison. He had created a lock that only a specific sequence of electrical pulses and chemical injections could open. It was a digital biological hybrid. "He's not just poisoned," Tess realized, her eyes darting between the screen and Dominic's fluttering chest. "He's being paced by the toxin. The aconitine is acting as an external pacemaker, but it's set to a lethal frequency." "What do we do?" Dante asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. "We have to stop his heart," Tess said. The room went silent. Dr. Jenkins stepped back. "That's suicide. His system is too weak to restart. If we don't stop it, the Lazarus Protocol will trigger a massive stroke in exactly 4 minutes, Tess countered, pointing to the countdown timer that had appeared on the monitor. "We stop the heart, flush the system with the saline base my father designed, and then we jumpstart him. It's the only way to purge the synthetic binder." Dante looked at his brother, the man who had raised him, the man who had ruled the city with a fist of iron and a heart of stone. Then he looked at Tess. He saw the soot on her face, the blood on her hands, and the unwavering clarity in her eyes. "Do it," Dante commanded. The next 60 seconds were a blur of high-stakes precision. Dr. Jenkins administered the sedative, while Tess prepared the purge solution, stopping the heart in 3, 2, 1. The monitor went to a flat, continuous tone. The silence that followed was heavier than any mountain. Dominic Moretti was dead. "Flushing the system," Tess whispered, her hands steady as she injected the clear fluid into the central line. She watched the clock. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Dominic's body was a shell, a vessel of cold marble. "Now!" Tess shouted. "Defibrillate! 200 joules!" Thump! Dominic's body arched off the bed. The line stayed flat. Again, 300. Thump. Nothing. Sterling began to weep. Dante turned away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But Tess didn't stop. She climbed onto the bed, straddling the boss's chest, and began manual compressions. She wasn't just pushing on a chest. She was fighting for her father's legacy, for the boy Leo who died in the basement, and for the only life she had ever known. "Wake up, you old bastard," she hissed, her palms bruising his ribs. "Wake up and finish this." Beep. A small, hesitant blip appeared on the screen. Beep, beep. Dominic's chest hitched. He coughed, a violent, wet sound, and his eyes snapped open. They weren't the eyes of a dying man. They were the eyes of a predator who had just returned from the underworld. He reached up, his hand closing around Tess's throat, not to choke her, but to pull her down. "The drive," he wheezed. "I have it, Dominic," Tess whispered, her tears finally falling, hot and fast. "Victor is gone. He tried to kill us all." Dominic's gaze shifted to Dante, then to the doctors. He sat up, the movement slow and agonizing, but possessed of an undeniable power. He ripped the intubation tape from his face. "Dante," Dominic rasped, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. "Call the council. Tell them the king is back. And tell them we're having a funeral tonight." "Whose funeral, Dom?" Dante asked, a dark grin spreading across his face. Dominic looked at the digital drive on the table, then at the black smudge of ash on Tess's cheek, the ash of the warehouse where her father had fallen. "Victor's," Dominic said, "and everyone who stood with him." Dominic turned to Tess. He reached out and touched the gold locket she wore, a gift from her father. "Arthur saved me twice, Tess. Once with his mind, and once with his daughter. You're not a maid anymore." "I just want the people who did this to pay," Tess said, her voice turning to ice. "They will," Dominic promised. "In this city, the Morettis don't just forgive. We redistribute the pain." Suddenly the intercom on the wall crackled. It was the head of the perimeter security. "Boss, we have a problem. Victor is at the gates. He's brought the West Side Syndicate with him. He says he's here to collect the body and finalize the transition." Dominic looked at the security feed. A line of black SUVs was parked outside, men with heavy weapons stepping out. Victor was at the front, looking triumphant. "He thinks I'm a corpse," Dominic whispered, a terrifying smile playing on his lips. "Let's not disappoint him. Tess, get your father's ledger. I need to know every name on that merger list." The king had awakened, but the war for Chicago had only just begun. The Moretti estate, a sprawling fortress of glass and steel overlooking the churning, dark waters of Lake Michigan, was being prepared for a ceremony that the city would remember for decades. But it wasn't the coronation Victor Moretti expected. To the outside world, the Iron King was dead, and the crown was passing to the legitimate brother. Inside the Great Hall, the atmosphere was funereal and suffocating. The room was draped in heavy black velvet that seemed to swallow the light of 1,000 flickering candles. In the center of the marble floor sat a closed mahogany casket, polished to a mirror shine, surrounded by massive, fragrant wreaths of white calla lilies, the very flowers that had been designed to be Dominic's death warrant. Victor Moretti entered the hall with the practiced swagger of a man who believed he had already won the war. He didn't look like a grieving brother. He looked like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. Behind him walked the power players of the underworld, Silas Vane, the cold-blooded leader of the West Side Syndicate, and Vanni the Vulture Rossi, a man known for picking the bones of falling empires. They were flanked by a dozen heavily armed gunmen, their eyes darting nervously around the shadows of the gallery, sensing the tension that saturated the air. "It's a tragedy that will haunt this city," Victor said, his voice echoing in the hollow, vaulted room. He paused by the casket, a fake sigh escaping his lips as he adjusted his silk tie. "My brother was a titan, a legend. But even legends are made of flesh and blood, and the heart is a fickle thing." Lorenzo the Ghost Vele stood at the head of the casket, his face a mask of impenetrable grief. He looked like an ancient statue carved from granite. "The family council is waiting in the dining hall, Victor," Lorenzo said, his voice gravelly. "They are restless. They wish to see the signed merger and the proof of succession before they pledge their final loyalty to the new regime." "Of course," Victor sneered, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Business doesn't stop for tears. Let's not keep the future waiting." As the group moved toward the massive oak doors of the dining hall, Tess Miller watched from the shadows of the upper gallery. She was no longer the invisible girl in the faded grey maid's uniform. She was dressed in a sleek, obsidian-black evening gown that hugged her frame like a second skin, her hair pulled back into a tight, lethal bun. In her hand, she gripped a high-end tablet connected to the penthouse's internal security mainframe. "Are you ready?" a voice whispered behind her, nearly silent. It was Dante Moretti. He looked like a wolf in a tuxedo, his eyes burning with a cold, focused fire. He checked the action on the silenced pistol tucked into his waistband. "I'm ready to finish what my father started," Tess said, her fingers dancing over the touch screen. "The thermal sensors are active. I've mapped every weapon and every heartbeat in that room. When I drop the hammer, there's no way out." Downstairs, the heavy doors of the dining hall swung open. The family council, 6 men who controlled the city's docks, its construction, and its dark underbelly, sat in total silence. At the head of the long mahogany table sat an empty, high-backed chair. Victor took his place at the right hand of that empty seat, the place of the heir apparent. He tossed a thick leather folder onto the table, the merger agreement. "With Dominic gone, we unite the North and West. One city, one rule. No more internal wars, only profit." "And what of the girl?" one of the council members asked, leaning forward into the candlelight. "The maid who saved him. She knows the chemistry. She knows the truth of the aconite." Victor chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "The maid is being disposed of as we speak, along with Dante. They both chose the losing side of history. By dawn, they will be nothing more than a memory in the river." "Is that so?" The voice didn't come from Victor. It didn't come from the council. It came from the deep shadows at the far end of the long table. A figure stepped into the flickering light of the chandeliers. Dominic Moretti. The room went deathly silent. This wasn't the pale, dying man from the penthouse medical wing. Dominic was dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit, his posture straight and commanding. His eyes held a terrifying, cold clarity that made even the vulture flinch. He looked healthy, vibrant, and possessed of a power that felt almost supernatural. The color drained from Victor's face, leaving him a ghastly shade of grey. Silas Vane reached for his holster, but a red laser dot appeared instantly on the center of his forehead, followed by a dozen more on the chests of his men. "I wouldn't," Dominic said, his voice a low, melodic threat. "My security team has a very itchy trigger finger tonight, and they've spent the last 3 years waiting for a reason to clear this room." Dominic stepped closer, the heels of his shoes clicking on the hardwood like the ticking of a doomsday clock. He slammed a tablet of his own onto the table, the screen displaying the footage Tess had found, the damning video of Victor in the secret lab, threatening Arthur Miller. "This is a fabrication!" Victor screamed, his voice cracking as he looked at the council for support. "A deep fake. Dante and the maid are trying to frame me to keep their power." "Then explain this," Tess's voice rang out from the gallery above. She stepped onto the balcony, the light catching the sharp angles of her face. She hit a command on her tablet, and the massive monitors in the room flickered to life, showing a live bank transfer and a ledger of shell companies. "That's the $20 million that disappeared 3 years ago," Tess explained, her voice echoing with authority. "It wasn't stolen by my father. It was moved through accounts owned by Victor Moretti to pay for the West Side hit. It was the down payment for my father's kidnapping and Dominic's long-term poisoning." The council members looked at Victor. In the Moretti Code, ambition was respected. But stealing from the family to pay for a hit on your own boss was an unforgivable sin. The air in the room turned lethal. "Victor," Dominic said softly, standing directly over his brother. "You always wanted the chair. But you forgot that a king isn't made of paper and contracts. A king is made of blood, and the loyalty of those he protects." Dominic looked up at Tess and gave a single, sharp nod. "Now," Tess whispered. She swiped the screen. The lights in the dining hall didn't just go out, they exploded. Small, localized electromagnetic pulses fried the electronic locks, sealing the heavy doors. Pop, pop, pop. The sound of silenced gunfire filled the pitch-black room. It was surgical. Dante and his elite guards, equipped with high-end night vision, moved through the room with predatory grace. When the emergency lights finally flickered on 10 seconds later, the West Side Syndicate leaders were slumped over the table. Dead, only Victor was left standing, his back against the wall, shaking as he held a small derringer. Dominic walked toward him, ignoring the gun. He reached out, gripped Victor's wrist, and twisted until the bone snapped. "The meeting is adjourned," Dominic said to the terrified council. "Tomorrow we rebuild. And Tess Miller? She is the new head of logistics for this family. Anyone who objects can discuss it with the dogs." As the room cleared, Tess received a notification on her tablet. A single photo of a carved wooden bird. Underneath, one word: checkmate. The aftermath of the blood banquet left a vacuum in the Chicago underworld that Dominic Moretti filled with ruthless efficiency. Within 48 hours, every asset tied to the West Side Syndicate had been seized, and every captain who had even considered Victor's offer was either in a cold grave or kneeling at Dominic's feet. But for Tess Miller, the victory tasted like ash. She stood in the center of her father's old workshop, located in the deep sub-basement of the Moretti estate. Dominic had given her full access, transforming the dusty, forgotten room into a state-of-the-art laboratory. She stared at the checkmate message on her tablet. The wooden bird in the photo was a blue jay. Her father, Arthur Miller, only carved those when he was hiding a message inside the wood, a secret code from her childhood. "You're obsessing," a voice said from the doorway. It was Dante Moretti. He was wearing a fresh bandage on his shoulder from a graze he'd taken during the warehouse raid, yet he looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He walked over and set a glass of expensive scotch on her workbench. "Victor is in a high-security psychiatric wing under a false name, Tess. He'll never see the sun again. The city is ours. Why do you look like you're waiting for a ghost?" "Because the fire at the warehouse didn't kill my father, Dante," Tess said, turning the tablet toward him. "Look at the lighting in this photo. The shadows are long, pointing east. This was taken at Navy Pier at sunset yesterday, 2 days after the explosion." Dante narrowed his eyes. "If Arthur is alive, why hasn't he come in? Dominic would give him anything. He's a hero." "Because my father knows something Dominic doesn't," Tess whispered, "and I think he's staying away to protect me." She turned back to her computer, her fingers flying across the keys. She wasn't looking at the Moretti accounts anymore. She was digging into the Lazarus protocol code she had used to save Dominic's life. She began to reverse engineer the source code, looking for the hidden comments that chemists often leave in their digital work. Deep within the encrypted layers, she found a string of text that wasn't a formula. It was a set of coordinates and a timestamp. 2 a.m., Navy Pier, Slip 42. The Navy Pier was a skeletal forest of iron and fog at 2 in the morning. Tess walked toward Slip 42, her boots echoing on the wooden planks. A small, weathered fishing boat named the Alchemist bobbed in the dark water. Standing on the deck was a man wrapped in a heavy wool coat. "Dad?" Tess called out. The man turned. It was Arthur. He looked older, his face scarred from the warehouse fire, but his eyes were sharp. He stayed behind the railing. "You shouldn't have come, Tess. Dominic played us all. He's been using synthetic stimulants to stay alive for a decade. The 12 doctors weren't there to save him from poison. They were there to finalize a procedure to make him essentially immortal, using blood harvested from the poor." Tess felt the world tilt. The charity clinics she had helped run were actually harvesting centers. Suddenly the pier was flooded with light. Dominic Moretti stepped out of a black limousine, flanked by Lorenzo and a dozen soldiers. "Arthur," Dominic said, his cane clicking on the wood. "I've given Tess a kingdom. She is the most powerful woman in Chicago. Because of me. Tess, stay. Be the architect of the new Moretti Empire. We will conquer death itself." Tess looked at her father, then at Dominic. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small wooden bird. "You're right, Dominic," Tess said, her voice turning to ice. "Chemistry is about balance. I didn't just save you. I found your records. I've already uploaded the clinic data to the FBI. It went live 30 seconds ago." Dominic's face transformed into a mask of rage. "You little—" "And one more thing," Tess said. "The Lazarus solution I gave you, it's a time-release catalyst. Without the secondary dose, which only I have, your heart will stop in exactly 10 minutes. Only this time, there won't be a maid to save you." The sound of hundreds of sirens began to wail in the distance. Dante stepped out from the shadows. He didn't raise his gun at Tess. He blew out the tires of Dominic's limousine. "The king is dead, Dom," Dante said. "Long live the girl." Tess jumped onto the boat as it roared to life. As they sped into the mist, she saw Dominic collapse to his knees, clutching his chest. She was no longer a maid. She was the one who had seen what the world missed. "Would you like me to generate a cinematic image of Tess and Arthur escaping into the fog while the Moretti Empire crumbles behind them? The Iron King fell not by a bullet, but by the hand of the girl who once scrubbed his floors." Tess and Arthur disappeared into the night, leaving behind a city in flames and a legacy of blood and science. If you were gripped by this tale of betrayal, chemistry, and the ultimate underworld twist, don't let the story end here. We have more high-stakes dramas and hidden truths coming your way every week. Hit that like button if you think Tess made the right choice. Share this video with someone who loves a good thriller, and subscribe to join our inner circle. Comment below. Would you have taken the empire or the freedom? Until next time, keep your eyes open. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one you don't notice.